All right. Welcome back. I think we're live now. This is episode 14 of Conversations from the Underground that we've been testing out here for good 15, 16 weeks or so. It's my turn to kick it off. We just start off with a nice conversation about whatever, take it in the direction that it leads us for an hour, and then synthesize it all into a quote and a title. So yeah, what's going on with you, man?
Man, I'm trying to get the semester going with some type of assessment because, that's the indicator as to whether or not if the students know what we've been trying to teach them for the semester. And with that whole week, with the weather being bad, thrown us all off. Like I'm a week behind for giving, exam one. And that's kind of stressful because we're almost close to spring break and we have no assessments yet.
Yeah.
But that's on me on how I set it up. So, but outside of that, like class is going well, lectures are going well. Outside of that, nothing much. Terrible. What about you?
Oh, busy like always. Can't ever seem to slow down, man. There's always one thing after another. It's like you're trying to kind of walk this path, and you got a long way to go, and things just keep getting thrown into the path. Some of which you pick up with you to take and carry along. Others of which you try to skirt and jump over because they're obstacles and barriers in your way. I think that's sort of a good maybe explanation of the way my life has been lately. I missed the African American read-in today, which I wanted to go to, which I usually have been every year. This was the first time I didn't make it. We had that Texas history lecture that we attended together was it Thursday?
Yeah, and that was cool.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. I mean, you had your class there. What you had a 1301 class?
I had at least 2 1301 classes in attendance.
Nice.
If not 3.
There was a Texas history class.
Mm-hmm.
I had about 2 or 3 students that I noticed. I think I didn't offer any credit or anything. I just encouraged them to show up. But yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think about it?
I appreciated his perspective for sure. I think it's good that we talk about Texas history and we have a more inclusive conversation about it. And I appreciated that he was willing to, because it's difficult, right? Texas history or anything that takes place in Texas tends to have like, I don't want to say like a gatekeeper mentality to it, but like there are some people that are very, be careful what you say about Texas.
Yeah, certainly.
And I always look at Texas as a microcosm or maybe even a macrocosm of the United States at large. When people say, hey, how is Texas perceived to the world? It's the same way that Texas, I should say, how is the United States perceived to the world? How does the world look at the United States? It's the same way the way the rest of America looks at Texas. Like Texas is on its own like weird place. Weird.
There may also be with the first part of what you said. I have an example of that. In fact, I was at a research trip at the British Library, and I was on a plane to come back home, but the plane had to stop at Houston. And there was this cat sitting next to me on the plane from Austria, and he said he was on holiday, which is basically his vacation. And he was a soldier, and he got like a month off, and he bought a ticket to go to Houston, Texas, which he thought he was going to be able to get off the airplane, go buy a gun, wear it on his holster, ride, horses and stuff. And he's asking me all these questions. Like, one of the questions he asked me was, he thought that it was illegal to go to church without a gun in the state of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to sadly inform the cat that he was going to the most industrial, if I'm being honest, worst big city in Texas when it comes to Houston, man. I mean, they got great rap music, horrible traffic, some good universities, but I mean, it's industrial and nasty. It ain't nothing like you thought.
Recently identified as the dirtiest city in all of the United States.
Wow, I know that.
Yeah, no. So
Dirtiest.
like, I don't know who did the poll, what the metrics were, but if you go and Google the dirtiest city of the United States, Houston comes up number 1.
Dang. Yeah, I never got to see that kid again, but I imagine he was thoroughly perplexed, to say the least. I mean, I've traveled all over the world. I mean, I went to Russia in 2005, which was a big difference than now. And they knew a big difference between Texas and the United States as well in their mind. I don't know what that is. There's a phrase that some historians have used called texceptionalism. Ty Cushing, his name, I think, says that term.
It's not terribly difficult. I mean, the American story of independence is akin to the Texas story of independence. And so I understand like the hyper sense of nationalism that we tend to apply to the United States. I could easily see that for Texas, for sure. I mean, the way we tell the story, like, and when we look at like the way the media also tells the story of Texas. I mean, how many Alamo movies do we need? How many stories about Texas cowboys do we need? There's just something about the Texas narrative. I saw a great film not too long ago, believe it or not. And it was, man, I can't recall the name of it. And so you'll have to bear with me. But there was this, I guess like a journalist of sorts from New York. And he had a rendezvous with a girl from Texas. Just a random hookup is what it was. Well, she happens to pass away. And the parents think that the dude from New York was the official boyfriend. So they're like, hey, you need to come down for her funeral. And the boyfriend is like, I barely know this chick. But he can't tell the family that they were simply a hookup. So he flies down for the funeral. And it goes back and forth. The whole film is about, identifying the typical Texas trope that, we go to school on horses, that we're backwards, that everything is slowed down. Everything's big. Yeah, for sure. But the journalist comes to this realization about Texas culture that he, I guess, like maybe overlooked, and that the stereotypes are not necessarily true. So like it was, I guess it's like a formulaic film about, the things that I thought they were are not necessarily what they turned out to be. But it was really insightful. The cat's name, the main actor, his last name is Novak, and Novak is he was a character in The Office. I just I can't place his first name. Keep
Mhm.
wanting to say Billy, but it was a solid film, and it talked about. I mean, granted, there were people with cowboy hats and a loving Whataburger,
You
but
know,
this
it's interesting you say that. The stereotypes and the typical Texas narrative, maybe not actually adding up or measuring up to reality. And I would say that we see this, I think, in the stereotypical concept of what actually Texas became and how it became part of the United States. So, for example, when you said that the Texas Revolution kind of mirrors the American Revolution and stuff like this, I would say that they maybe tried to stereotypically do that, but it's drastically different. Like one of them, an empire was like sending people out as satellite states, which eventually led them to decide to make their own. This
Mhm.
one, we got somebody who's invited to their own to another nation state, which they go to and see the value, so they start telling their buddies who begin to illegally cross the border uh, into Mexico without break. Mexico has an Anglo illegal immigrant problem, uh, which is causing problems that already exist in a very hugely diverse area of Mexico that has very little control federally over. And that's one of the things I like about his book that I didn't. He mentioned it a little bit, but he kept saying, "I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this." If he would have elaborated more on just all of the different groups of people who are contesting for power and control in Texas, and how these Anglo immigrants just sort of jump on a bandwagon at the right place at the right time. It just so happens at the time in which the United States of America cannot speak at all about what's going on.
yeah, I mean, well,
Interestingly enough,
you also
he mentioned,
have go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
interesting enough, in the first book, Unfinished Revolution, which is about the British, the repulsion and the attraction of Britishness in the United States, um, he describes Texas's role in that whole issue of the United States not wanting to recognize Texas as a state because of some problems going on with Great Britain. Um, so you see all of these pieces. The point is that you see all these pieces together of all these things from around the world actually coming together to give these people this opportunity to establish a slave state, cotton production, cattle culture society that ultimately becomes a state in the United States.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me that, or the way we can relate, or I would imagine how most Texans relate to America, is that you know there's a big government trying to tell us what to do, and we're not going to put up with it, and we're willing to fight back. The story of the United States is founded on that principle. Like these guys are overtaxing us, so we're going to fight back. Um, the main gripes for many of the so-called Texas revolutionaries were that the Mexican government was trying to, or they were over exerting their force or power on certain items, taxation, one of them. the notion that they had slaves, another one, which often, or I should say, rarely gets brought up. But like that, there's a parallel there. One thing I ain't even gonna front. When the guy was speaking, when he told me how short the Texas Revolution was, I had no clue that it was that short. Yo, 6 months?
Yeah, man. So I think first off, I think the American Revolution was not about taxes.
Oh, of course not.
I think they used that as an excuse
Yes.
because they were worried about the direction that the British Empire was going, and they had all these other ideas that they had moral sort of capital that they could claim by taking advantage of an opportunity and staking out this concept of independence and bringing in this era of declarations. You Texans maybe tried to grab onto some of that rhetoric as well. But they came into the country in an agreement, right? If you come in here, we're going to give you land, but you can't have slaves, okay? You have to convert to Catholicism, and you cannot participate in prostitution, were the big three goals that the Mexican government had for these people, which they couldn't agree, they couldn't stop doing, even though they said they would. And even with the slave thing, Mexico even says this: we'll give you an exception, we'll grant you a clemency, we're going to break, we're going to give you a little bit of time, 6 months here before get rid of enslavement people. Since you brought them, we're giving you all this opportunity to get right, and
Right.
they don't. Things are fine, but all these like Tejanos, these New Mexicans, these Californians, these indigenous groups start revolting against Mexico, and a string of them in this border Southwest region. That I think these Anglos are like, oh, here's an opportunity. Let's jump onto this and get this independence. And I just never knew how diverse all of this land was, man. Even when I started talking about it and teaching about it, it was always, Mexico and Anglos and the United States.
Right.
But you got to add dozens of Native American tribes. You got to add
That
so many
that
other
for me, when
European. Go ahead.
it's Dr. Haynes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And first
Sam
name
Haynes.
Samuel or Sam Haynes.
Sam Haynes.
Yeah, that was very interesting. The way he approached how, I guess, most Americans might oversee certain Native American groups as just being here, and they weren't.
Right.
That there's a group of indigenous natives, and then there are natives that are, I guess, I hate to say the word transplanted, or they just simply immigrated here.
Yeah.
Because they're pushed out of other areas. Now, the reason why that's interesting is because we tend to just think or look at Native Americans that wherever they are, they're always indigenous, and that's not the case.
Right. There's a
Like,
diaspora. You got the Indian diaspora,
dude,
Native
no,
American
for sure.
diaspora.
Like, to look at Native Americans and think that, well, as much as they are native, then this must be their land, and that's not true. Because the way Dr. Haynes was painting it is that there are indigenous natives to Texas,
Right.
but the ones that we tend to focus on, whether they be the Apache or the Comanche or whatever particular group,
Yeah.
that those are not indigenous natives to the land, so-called land of Texas. That they are transitioning and moving into this region, and they will become predominant. But to look at
Yeah.
those groups as if they are indigenous, and that's what's wild to me is like, so wait a minute. There are some Native Americans that aren't indigenous,
Right.
which sounds odd, right?
many of these people were transplanted over a century, right? If you think about all of these different treaties that the United States government signed in the early Republic era, stuff that we're going to talk about in Unit 5 of my History 1301 class, you see the displacement of a lot of these Indians. Once those broken treaties turn into removal policy, where are they being removed to? They're being removed to these areas like Texas, right? They're encountering other cultures. They're combating each other and contesting each other for ground and territory.
For me, it painted this picture that, like, yo, so-called Native Americans are not indigenous.
Right.
So what makes you indigenous? I think so. Like, if you're telling me Apaches aren't indigenous, Comanches aren't indigenous because of what? Under what circumstance? You could make an argument, well, they weren't originally born here. They don't have culture here. Well, who does, and then when? And then when do we ultimately certify that these individuals are indigenous? Like, if you're looking at Native Americans as a whole, which a lot of people tend to do, we look at all Native Americans as this like monolithic figure or culture, but it's on a spectrum and it's mad diverse. And some Native Americans were more likely to adopt American customs or European customs. Some were, completely not, and I don't want to say antagonistic, but antithetical to the adoption of European customs, and they just wanted to remain true to their culture. So you have Native American life on this spectrum, but we tend to look at them as like, no, all Native Americans are the same. But Dr. Haynes is making this reference that no, some Native Americans are not indigenous
Yeah,
to
man.
this region. And if that's the case, then who is indigenous? Who makes that?
Okay, so if you go back far enough, nobody's indigenous except for Olduvai Gorge in Central Africa, right? If you really break it down in that regard. But if you want to zero in, let's say, like on the Comanche, right?
Okay.
I read a book about the Comanche a couple years back. They call them the Nurmanaz, with the name that they gave themselves, which just means people. They're the least restricted culture that we know of in history. The adult male of the Comanche has least restrictions upon his decision making than any other band of people we've known. They don't have a central government. They just got little. You decide if you got charisma to form a group of people together, and you develop a band, and your band and strength and status increase with the number of horses you have in your herd, and you move around and things like this. Now, if you look at the history of them, they didn't exist prior to the Columbian Exchange, right? When Europeans came over here, disease and displacement decimated tremendous numbers of indigenous populations who lived in the Caribbean and the East Coast, and many of them began to move inland. Europeans went to South America, started moving up. The first time we hear about something of a Comanche would be on a horse raiding a Spanish outpost in this random region in the early 1700s. So essentially what the Comanche would be is a culture that developed through significant displacement, survival. So it's going to be pretty militant. Even the location and where you are out there, Texas in the heat without air conditioning. Some of you fools can't even stand that. They freak out when I tell them I ain't got no AC in my car. Oh my God, how you gonna survive? Get out here, dude. The Apache would be another one that's kind of similar, that developed in that regard, which began to kind of fight for power with the Comanche. Here's one of the things that really fascinates me. While all this is going on, I read this in a book once called Atlantic history that had a chapter over like the Dutch Atlantic, the English Atlantic, the French Atlantic, and the Indian Atlantic. And it like, if you look all the way up to almost the 19th century, if you take square footage of the North and South American continent, or let's just the North American continent, I can't remember if South America was in there, but if you just take the square footage of North American continent, it's still dominated by Native Americans. Well into the creation of the United States of America, they still have tremendous of land. I mean, but we always focus on the colonizers, their effect, their impact. This is for a lot of reasons. One reason we have this, I think, is because of the fact that the colonizers won, and the United States of America developed out of this colonizing, transformed into manifest destiny culture that justified their movement into these areas. But also, we simply, even today, with people who want to decolonize the history, we don't have very many people with the language skills and the history necessary to really understand this stuff. So you don't have very many Native Americanists in universities, much less community colleges, right? So this is another reason why it's important to take humanities classes beyond your community college level, because you get a much more nuanced when you take a history class that's so focused and detailed by an expert in a particular subject, who can talk to you for 16 weeks, 3 hours a week, quite proficiently over a very specific topic. You get a big difference in perspective. Things start to look differently. You're like, wow, I didn't think about that. And even when you do that, like we've done, you still encounter things that get you looking at things differently. That's why I love going to these things, because with the amount of knowledge I have, when an expert like that comes in and puts some of that knowledge for me together, makes those connections for me, it gives you that enlightening moment, and then it resonates strongly and allows me to then communicate that information to my students.
Yeah, that makes me rethink, like, where was Dr. Haynes before this re-envisioned perspective on Texas? Does that make, like,
yeah, certainly.
Because now he definitely has a more inclusive perspective on Texas. And that makes me wonder, well, where were you 10 years ago? Where were you 15 years ago? Where were you 20 years ago?
Yeah,
what was
so
your perspective then?
a little bit in there in my introduction. I tried to take a little extra time in that introduction. I felt like maybe I should have taken even more time and done a little more investigation. But that book that I mentioned of his, Unfinished Revolution, which was published in 2010, is the first time in which I started paying attention to him. Before then, I was like, the hell do I care about no Texas historian? I'm at a university. I'm spending $3,000 a semester to learn about Texas. You kidding me? About Russia and China and all this amazing stuff that was strange and beyond anything that I was ever encountering in my life. I kept hearing the same old crap about no stupid Texas Alamo. The only thing I liked about the Alamo was that Ozzy Osbourne pissed on it. Before I saw Haynes, and before Haynes got me into really enjoying Texas history, having the capacity to really look at it in these rich ways as a battleground for contested ideas. Now, before that book, that Unfinished Revolution book was great. I thought it was a break from what he had done, because it was about Britishness in the American, from about the 1800s to the 1850s, how Americans, like, sometimes were repulsed. Some things repulsed Americans about Britishness that made them react, and some things attracted them about Britishness that made them react. But what we know is that the United States, everything it did with Britishness on its mind. And that's what got my attention, because I'm a transatlantic historian. I like looking at these connections and whatnot. before then, he did some stuff on the Mexican Revolution that I remember. He had a book out on the Republic that I've never read. But it's a good question. I don't know. It's like, it's weird how this works. Like, people be in a field for decades, and then all of a sudden they come up with this new way of looking at something, and then everybody like gravitates attention towards that. And then many times they oftentimes forget that they never knew it. And it's like, well, what were you doing for the past 30 years while this thing was going on? Maybe you're looking at micro stuff. Maybe they're looking at micro stuff. They're counting this or counting that. But when you do these things, when you write such minute, detailed monographs about a day in the Alamo or whatever, or translate somebody's journal, you do that a bunch, then you encounter more sources, and then you're able to kind of step back and make these big meta-narrative changes. And I think Haynes has been doing that, man. He's been there since 93, really just dabbling in a bunch of different stuff. Studying about Mexico, studying about Texas, Britishness, all these things. You bring it together, gives you an enlightening perspective.
Yeah, I felt that during the lecture and in the Q&A, I felt like he could have made it more clear, but I know where he was coming from. That if we decide to include these narratives, which we have to, because if we don't, then the history is incomplete. But that by including these narratives, it will alter the existing traditional narrative, because you're adding ingredients to a recipe and then somehow not expecting the recipe to change. No, it changes. The dish changed. And but it felt like he was hesitant to admit. I mean, he was saying it without saying it. That by adding these narratives, that if we explore these narratives, which is what we should do, because you can't talk about Texas and be dismissive or not being mindful of the Mexican American contribution or the African American contribution or the Asian American contribution, whatever. And he was speaking as if I'm including it now. But it seemed like he was also not willing to boldly affirm by including them. That means that this recipe is now
the whole thing has to change. Yeah, I think he said at some point he was surprised he hadn't, nobody's tried to like shoot him or shot at him or anything like that. But he made that argument that we can't just put a blurb or an insert, like, here's the Texas narrative, and then, oh, by the way, there were these Tejanos here, or, oh, by the way, that these women did this, or there were these African Americans. He's like, that's not enough. That's not doing anything. When you add another ingredient, just like you said, the end result is going to be different. So we need to investigate that. You can't just sit here. But you want to hold on to this theory of, come and take them, mine.
My critique on this guy, and I thought he was, and I agree with him, and I love the information he was sharing, is that my critique on him was that he could have been more direct on that by including these new ingredients. I'm changing this. This is going to happen. Like the recipe is now changed by adding these new ingredients. He subtly hinted at it. He goes, he was making reference to like, well, by adding these things, we have to assume that things are going to change.
Right.
And like, there's no assumption. There's no assumption. No, by adding these things, it is going to change. Just say it. And I think that, because of his stature, because of his look, I mean, the brother looks like he teaches Texas history. No disrespect, Dr. Haynes. Dude, the brother looks like I mean, he was born at the Alamo. Like,
Yeah.
no disrespect, but he's statuesque.
Yeah. I
He
like it.
has he has a natural curl to his hair. He had a very well kept beard.
Unique
The dude
beard.
was wearing like a, a, a leather, like a brushed leather, blazer
Yeah.
with denim jeans. Like, what are you doing? Like, what are we doing here? Like, he was but I know he may not be that, but he definitely looked the part. Like, so I felt that he could have been a bit more bold with him. Just like, hey, yo, like, what? Let's not front. It Adding these narratives is going to change the conversation
Yeah. No,
because
no.
because adding these narratives change the narrative. Bottom line.
So, two things for me. One, I wish I would have done the library reading room instead of the North Ballroom. I ain't never gonna do the North Ballroom again unless we're gonna be doing like food and signing or whatever. Because I kept hearing noise, and I had a hard time hearing them sometimes.
Mm,
I
no.
don't think anybody had a hard time hearing me though, right? Did you? When I was
Your question? No.
no, at any time, like when I was giving a presentation up front before, um, you could hear me very loud and clear, but him
Okay.
not so much. Now I think this has a lot to do with my second thing.
Okay.
We need to get more of these guys talking to our type of institutions. And we
Mhm.
also need, as I mentioned in my comment, to invest in getting these guys to elementary schools, junior, or maybe even not elementaries, maybe junior high,
Yeah.
high school. Um, these guys need to get more comfortable speaking in those settings. I think he said exactly what you said, but he said it in a very erudite way in a couple of different areas of his talk, and then moved quickly on instead of emphasizing things more and using better rhetoric like a Malcolm or a Martin who's speaking to a population, know how to place more emphasis on the needs of the meaning that's coming that you're conveying, as
And
opposed to an academic who tends to just, you know, flow these things and then move on. Does he?
I mean, no disrespect to Dr. Haynes because I know this is recorded and whatnot. Because obviously he's an established professor, intellect, and he's a scholar in this field. However, understanding your audience and knowing how to convey to that audience is different.
Absolutely.
The reason why when you speak, students listen, it's because you're well versed to this audience as
Right.
much as I am, and we understand what clicks with them, which is why there may be a disconnect between someone like Dr. Haynes and our students, because they're not university level, they're university capable, but not necessarily, these upper class level lecturers or students who are inclined to hear a lecturer for an hour on end. Now, he did his best. I wouldn't say he's a master lecturer to our audience.
Not to our
I
audience.
would,
No,
yeah, I would say
no way.
you are more of a master lecturer to our audience than he is. And this is
Sure.
no disrespect to you, Dr. Haynes. You watch this later on, dog. I thought you were dope, but that's,
Yeah.
you know, what I vibe with may not be what our students vibe with. And I respect the notion that maybe we should have intellectuals like Dr. Haynes visit campuses like a high school or a middle school or maybe even elementary to shoot his perspective that might run counter to what is conditioned to them by way of a state mandated curriculum. That was a
Right.
great suggestion. To look
And
at
you
him as if
cooperate
he's
with it. Like we have a panel of 4 or 5 people who all spend $400 to go register for a stupid conference, and you got to spend at the hotel, and you got to sometimes get flight tickets and all this. You dropping 2 G's just to go to this weekend little thing when you could take that money, bring you, me, Haynes, bring another person, pay us to go to a school in our local region and have a little workshop where we speak to these kids.
Right. And I thought that was a great idea. I think
You're
that's
going to
a
get
very
more.
valuable idea.
I think it's a necessary. I think we're at the area now where this ain't about. This is a necessity. We're losing big time. Remember that email or that essay I sent you a while back. I can't remember the name of it, but it was like showed the percentages of decline in history departments across the
Right.
board: 20, 30%, 40%. People are leaving and they're not being replaced. Shoot, look at us. We lost 20, 30%.
Right. Well, I mean, again, no disrespect to Dr. Haynes, is that a lecture like his is more built towards a graduate school or an upper class
Yeah.
class of students, because it could be lost upon these entry level.
Oh yeah, and you know what? In fact, I think he was trying hard to do that, to try to bring it down on another level, which you could imagine how bad it is for those who don't even try, and they just let their massive brain filled of all the
intellect,
books they've done just take over. So two things here too, or one thing actually, one key that students have to realize that's a developmental process over the course of an academic career is to understand the difference between observing a lecture based off how the lecturer says something, as opposed to observing a lecture on what the person is saying. These are two different categories. And I would argue the second one requires a tremendous amount of experience to reach. You can't just come out unless you're one of these people who got a photographic memory and they just got these natural genetic predispositions to internalize everything the first time they ever heard it. The vast majority, particularly this generation, it's getting worse with media and the technology reducing our attention span and making it even more difficult to make the transition from paying attention to a lecture and focusing on the way the individual is saying it, compared to paying attention to a lecture and focusing on what the individual is saying. That is a very difficult thing to do, because a lot of times, if the person is very good about how they say it, it'll pull your attention away from what they are saying. And you have to be conscious to make sure that the way someone is saying something is not pulling your attention too far away from what they are saying to create a disconnect, which some people deliberately do to sway audiences towards.
Well, and here's my concern about all that, is that there's no confusion as to what has more value. It's never what you're saying, it's how you are saying it. The way you say something can influence the masses to the nth degree, as opposed to what you're actually saying.
Right.
We saw this with Trump. And I would almost argue that, like, and no disrespect to Dr. Haynes here. I mean, it's a 70-30 relationship. I don't put any onus or error upon the audience not being able or willing to acknowledge what is being said. The 70% of that, and obviously these are arbitrary numbers, but it is up to the speaker to discern, this is my audience. I need to figure out how to connect to them. And if you can't do that, then that's their fault.
Here's the irony of it. If you want people to listen to you, the way you say it is important. But the irony is, the most important part is what's being said. So this is what's funny.
Okay, if that's the case,
that's
the case, how do you explain why so many people listen to Trump?
Hold on. Listen deeper. The most important part is what's being said Because the easiest route is how you go about saying it. So here, let me say this again. The most important part, if your interest is to get people to listen or to hear you or pay attention to you, is how you say it. But what's being said is the thing that really matters, because the true purpose is not just to get the people to listen to you. The true purpose is what you're going to tell them. Now, if you are getting people to listen to you and telling them good stuff, then that's a strategy that makes you good to convey that information. But the purpose is to still get that information, because I can get you to listen to me and I can say a bunch of stuff that's garbage, and you may believe it because you thought the most important part is how I say it. The most important part about how I'm saying it is to get you to listen to me. But that's not the key to it. You got to be aware to understand that the knowledge is what matters, so that you don't get duped into listening to someone and not focusing on what they're saying.
No, I you know what, I'll have to take a couple steps back and readdress that, because I remember on many occasions listening to Trump speak where his tactics are very poor, and that if and when speaking wise, he knows he's going down a bad path. What he's good at is remembering what they want to hear and then just throwing that out there. You know, understanding that they're a bunch of hungry dogs. No matter how you hold the meat, as long as you throw the meat out there, Trump is good at that. So it's not necessarily what you're saying, but remembering when to allow your audience to eat. That's also an element of how you do it, but you have to remember to feed them what they want to eat as well. You know, you give a bunch of dogs bubble gum, they're not going to touch it. So like, in regards to Dr. Haynes, for me, I was listening to him and I was eating it up, because I'm the type of guy to eat that up. I was taking notes on my phone. I had questions for him, but I was willing to let the students entertain that. I felt that there could have been a disconnect. I felt like a speaker like you or myself could have resonated better with our students. But I think more and more that he engages these audiences, he learns how to adjust.
Yeah, certainly. Stronger they'll be. And this is another interesting point that I thought about, thinking about his responses to the questions, particularly mine, and his inability, or not inability, his choice to not interject something that would be in his mind construed as not his expertise, his opinion, his perspective. This is different. Like follow me here. This is the difference between when I was talking about how you say something, how you present the lecture is about herding sheep. What you say is about the path. What you're lecturing about is the path. Now, you may not be able to get sheep to follow the path on their own. You may have to start focusing on guiding those sheep, bringing them around, show them the way. And you may even have to lead them on that path if you really want them to be on that path. Or some people can herd the sheep and blaze a whole different path, go through all the wildflowers in the protected area, smash through everything, because they don't care about what they're saying. They don't care about bringing the sheep onto the path. What they care about is that the sheep are following them. That's the only thing that matters, is that the sheep are following us. And you
Right.
can tell that Haynes is not someone who just cares about the sheep following him, or else he could have went all in on this taking down the white man story, um, uh, you know, revamping the narrative. He could have inserted a lot of rhetoric that you may hear me insert when I'm giving a speech or something about like food injustice or anything like, right? You know, you like, you're trying to say things in ways that are bringing more intensity, whereas these people, like academics like him, good ones, who are so concerned with the information, they have a tendency to slip up when it comes to the way in which they present the information, because they're fearful that they may take something too much liberties with the pathway, so they don't want to steer from that. They're so, that pathway is a sacred thing to them, that they don't want to steer you in some sort of different direction. If that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense and explains exactly why he made the statement, and you should observe this and you can co-sign this. He goes, academics have seemed to have lost their influence.
Yeah.
And you know why? Because he's doing exactly what he shouldn't be doing. As and again, no disrespect, Dr. Haynes. Like, if you end up watching this, doc, like, I thought your lecture was dope, dude. I dig it, and you know,
Yeah, and put it this way. Hold on, and put it this way. You know, you're measuring him based off like the best at doing that, which, again, would be, at least in our area, I feel like strongly us. I'm just stating facts, because that's
Hey,
what we do. Right?
no disrespect.
But here's the thing. But if you measure
I
him
could
up
I
against,
could
like,
sell his book better than he could.
but here's the thing. If you look at some of these other academics, they wouldn't keep the attention at all. He was able to at least get them in. We got some people over here working for us who I'd be like, nah, you got to, he probably doing better than you. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
and you know what? Like, so, like, you herald him as a great speaker. I bet he's a better writer than he is a speaker. I'm not dogging his presentation. I was enthralled by it, man. I took notes, and I'm still googling the guys that he mentioned.
Yeah.
And I want to, man. That whole notion of Zavala, the relationship with Zavala and
Santa Ana.
Lopez, Santa Ana. Yeah.
Blew my mind, dude.
That makes perfect sense now,
Mm-hmm.
as to why it resulted so quickly the way it did. But that's neither here nor there. My thing with him is that he goes, well, academics don't have the influence or the clout or the power
They said clout.
that we should or used to. And I understand why. It's because, as you just mentioned, he's not willing to fight the fight that the other individuals who are so-called purveyors of information are willing to fight. They're not willing to get dirty. You know, he made it very clear. It's like, well, that's not my area of expertise, so I'm not going to speak on that.
Right.
And that statement should warrant respect. Man, thank you for not speaking on something that you are not knowledgeable on. But at the same time, no, dog, you're knowledgeable. And if you're not,
No,
such
he
a
is.
public issue. But that's my point. Like, yo, he is.
Yeah.
But he played it safe.
Right.
And was like, I don't want to speak on that. No, that's why we're weak. Is because we have an opportunity to speak on something and we don't.
Which goes back to this concept of training and the need to have more. These fools talking about collaboration. Y'all over here talking about collaboration. All y'all, who's listening here trying to put us in cubicles. You want us to collaborate. I don't know how that's going to work in the neighborhood, but here's a great idea: collaborating with university professors to figure out these problems, how to disseminate information. I am going to be a much more stronger facilitator of the history of Texas now that I sat through Haynes's discussion with them students. If we have more workshops like that, if we incentivize that type of collaboration, then we just might have a discipline in a few decades to call history. Still,
I mean, I dug it, but this is coming from our perspective. He resonates with people of our caliber,
right? Which is why,
and then
like
through
how I started.
us,
So remember, he said at the beginning that was the best introduction anybody ever had for me.
yeah,
Well, maybe it should have been a little longer. It should be. It's not just him coming to speak. It should be maybe one of us for a good 15, 20 minutes, then him for 30 minutes, then one of us again for another 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 20 minutes, so that it's like you got this, you know, conveyor, then you got this academic, then you got this conveyor, and
well,
you
that
have.
I think that's why we have the Q&A, where by and large, if students aren't willing to ask questions, the more entrenched academics are willing to do so. That would be you and I. So that's how we feel that. I thought you gave a great introduction. 10 minutes is enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like the way he sold his book was for, again, entrenched academics. Now, what value does that have? It has a value on someone like you and myself and every other historian on that campus, who then relay that
Right.
to the students, because I'm going to do it.
Right.
And I know you already probably do it. And I bet Jenny, as well versed as she is, my God, she probably already hits them hard.
Yeah.
So that's what's great about our campus, that we have a diversity of specialization. Like, we don't, I can expect Jenny to hit it hard when it comes to the South and Southwest. Mike to hit him with the Euro, you to hit him from every angle. And not only that, not hit him from every angle historically, but hit them from a contemporary vernacular that resonates with the community. That's your tremendous value. But these type of events are positive for our campus, because of exactly what I was just stressing. That
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Sure.
look at Texas history differently. I
Yeah.
will. Now, my students, I don't expect them to, man, because that's now up to me. That's my job. That's your job.
Yeah.
Let's go hit it. Let's go give it to them hard. And then we reinvigorate a different perspective on Texas, that it's not the Alamo, that it's not Davy Crockett, that it's this, it's complicated. It's a complicated story with complicated cultures. That's not just simply Anglo-Americans or migrating Americans, that there were natives here, there were Black people here, there were, a multitude
Have
of
all
cultures
these
here.
different
Yeah,
kind of threads just being
for sure.
spun all
For
around,
sure.
right?
And that was what was dope about his conversation, is that he made that very clear. As to whether or not the students pick that up,
Yeah. And hopefully they got one or two little gems that they can kind of keep with. And what's funny, I think, is that, he even said that first book that I had mentioned in my introduction was written for academics. This one is more, I try to make it for a popular audience. I do have the book. I do want you to try to just read the first few pages to get a feel of his writing style, so that you can see what I was talking about in terms of how he wrote this, compared to, like, a more academic monograph type of thing, and you can see a really good writer in there who keeps your
oh,
going really well.
that's the next thing I would like to do about Dr. Haynes is, now that I'm aware of his speaking style, I want to read his academic prose, and then his, I guess, his popular audience prose,
Yeah, yeah.
and see where that goes, and how much that changes, because it has to change, right?
Hmm.
And so I'm interested in that for sure.
I'm gonna reach out to him to do one of them historical underground interview notes from the underground interview. See if he'll do
Oh,
that.
that'd be dope.
Yeah. But yeah, man, I thought it was interesting. I'm glad that uh, we did it, and I like this idea that we've been kind of discussing here, connected to like information and how we use information. I don't have anything on my historical quote of the day list yet, when it comes specifically to Texas. This this showed me that I need to add more, but there was one that keeps kind of popping out in my mind, by James Baldwin. I don't know.
Mm.
Let me know what you think about it, because we're running up on the hour time
Yeah,
frame. Yeah.
yeah, we're on it.
Um, and feel free to pick another one if you don't think this works. Um, by James Baldwin, it says, "You cannot know what you will discover on the journey. What you will do with that, or what you will do with what you find." So let me repeat that again. You cannot know what you will discover on the journey, what you will do with what you find, or what you find will do to you.
Right.
Say it one more
Yeah, it's
time.
not a.
You cannot
Go ahead.
know what you will discover on the journey, what you will do with what you find, or what you find will do to you.
Yeah.
It
I
just
mean,
reminded
it's
me of
not
this
terribly
idea.
difficult.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you
It,
got it.
it reminded me of this idea that we've been exploring briefly about the way in which you say something to people, how you say something, what you focus your emphasis on, the purpose for what you do, and the need to pay attention to the path, but also know that by paying attention to the path, it's going to uh, do something to you that you need to then bring to how you go about conveying information to people. So it kind of like keeps me focused on where we're going on this journey. The journey itself is important, um, and that we have to constantly be with these two things: the approach that we use on how to convey information to our audience, as well as
Mm.
as well as the actual information that we are conveying them, making sure that it's not misconstrued, that it's not overly hyperbolized in a way that gets them looking at things that are in a way that blurs the path too much. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. I mean, I take that quote, and it makes me think immediately of a Mike Tyson quote, and that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face,
Mm.
and that uh, your reaction to the obstacles or hurdles or bumps along your path are more indicative of your character than anything else that we deal with. Um, it's how we respond um, to the journey, and that's what I gather from this path. I'm sorry, from that quote. How we respond is indicative of who we are and our character, and um, you know, in relation to the whole, what I would like to focus on is the conversation regarding Texas history, Dr. Haynes' presentation, um, of which many people might have missed. The name of his book is called Unsettled Texas.
Unsettled land.
Oh, Unsettled Land. Yes.
land.
And that was it's a story revolving around the revolution of Texas.
Exactly. A little bit before it, a little bit after
Right.
it, and the connection to all these
And
different threads.
I think there's incredible value to the way we have traditionally responded to the story of Texas. Traditionally, we have responded that the story of Texas is akin to 1776. You know, we fought back against a tyrannical government, and we would not allow anyone to abridge our freedoms. That would be Texas or America. That was the traditional approach. And I think what Dr. Haynes was stressing is that that can still be true. But let's not forget these other voices. Let's add these narratives and be mindful that by adding them, it might do what?
Gonna switch the story.
It might change. It changes the narrative a bit,
Yeah.
and that bothers. It bothers people, of course, because now I have to do something new. I have to learn something new, and we see this today with individuals that are like, "Why do I need to learn a new pronoun? Why do I need to learn a new gender? Why do I need to learn about this minority group? Why do I need to learn about?" Because everything's cool when you're comfortable. When everything's been benefiting you, everything's been cool. And I ain't even gonna front, dog. Like I've learned as of lately, somebody told me about what it means to be able-bodied, you know, and this is in reference to individuals that struggle with the fact that they can't use their legs, they can't use their arms, they are disadvantaged in mobility in some area. And I look at it, I'm like, okay, but that's such a like. I only say that because I'm of able body, like
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
privileged perspective to have, man. So like, many people are gonna be like, I don't care to hear about what was I forgot the guy's name that he
Sam,
mentioned. Sam, yeah, Dr. Haynes mentioned a particular Native American, big mouth or no disrespect, the particular
Bold,
Native American. I'm gonna look it up right now.
Chief
Hold on.
Bold as well.
Oh, you're right. No. It was Chief Bolds.
Yeah.
You're right. Chief Bolds.
And you know what?
Like, go
To,
ahead.
to bring this back to Baldwin's quote, in reference to your comment that some people are not going to like it when you change the Texas narrative, those people are ones who haven't come to the realization that you cannot know what you will discover on the journey. They've made their mind up before they began the journey that they try to insert the path on the journey. So one of the keys that we have to do is be open-minded when we confront the past and not allow our preconceived notions before we begin to investigate them to control the direction of the journey that we take.
And not for nothing, this is not a problem of so-called uneducated individuals. This is a problem amongst academics as well. That we have this thesis.
Exactly.
We have a thesis, and then we go and do the research, and we're only finding material that supports our pre-established thesis,
right?
As opposed to having a thesis, going and doing the research, and stumbling upon information that might destroy our thesis, and then us having to reestablish a new thesis.
Mm-hmm.
But cats are so under the gun academically, they're like, no, I know that this information is going to disrupt my thesis. Forget that. Let me just focus on the information that supports my thesis. Confirmation bias.
Right.
Academics are just as inclined to engage in that type of problematic learning as well, man. And it's indicative of all people that
in my first book, in my dissertation on cannabis, I made the argument that there's this guy named Ernest Abel, who's a doctor, who wrote this book called Marijuana: The First 12,000 Years in the 1980s. Even though marijuana was a word that doesn't apply to all this stuff. I made this argument that this book is tremendously anachronistic. A lot of people have just kept reciting it, kept citing it, kept citing it, kept citing it without actually going to the sources. Because one guy cited this source. I was reading Abel's source. He cites this source. I go to look for that source. And when I find it, turns out he never looked at that source. He only took what some guy in the 1870s said about that source. And that guy in 1870 accidentally mixed up the date by saying 1839 instead of 1859, which completely messed up the whole narrative of when cannabis came in, and nobody ever bothered to go back and pay attention to him because he's a doctor and he wrote this book, and it kind of built on all these things. This is one of the reasons why, Dr. Garrigus, when I used to take a lot of classes for him as a graduate student, we take research classes where you have to give this big paper, and he made us start out, instead of getting a thesis topic, he made us start out, go randomly pick a document from the site, read it, and see what you can come up with about it. Like, start looking into it. Try to pick a topic in this way. There's all these different approaches that you can take to kind of try to guard yourself from making these mistakes that brought us to this conversation in the first place, right? These mistakes of using your own cultural lens, your own bias to affirm history, and then being afraid to accept the need to switch the narrative because the journey shows you the need to do it, right? That's the key, is that we got to be awareful and mindful of these cultural lenses that we all wear every day, because it's not, like you said, academics to everybody. We all have a cultural lens that influences what we focus on, what we think about, what we do, what we see, everything.
And I hope it doesn't get misconstrued when I was making reference to, I wonder where Dr. Haynes was 20 years ago. I wonder where Dr. Haynes was 30 years ago. Because if anything, Dr. Haynes' perspective on his new book is just indicative of the intellect.
Yeah, accumulation.
It's indicative of his headspace. It's indicative of where we all should want to be. And that's like, when I encounter new information, I'm subject to change. Now, you might call me a hypocrite, and my earlier followers will call me a liar or a flip-flopper or whatever. Like, no, man, when we get exposed to information, we're more likely to become hypocritical. And that some of your greatest leaders are hypocrites.
Yeah.
Because
that's that
brainwash.
That goes back to that manufacturing consent. No manner in which they brainwash us to kind of take positions in teams. The more micro you go, the more violent resistance it is. It reminds me of gangs. What we used to call people who, you a Crip, but you try to act like you a Blood. Like, you get hit real hard because you don't switch sides. You stick to your turf no matter what. What if this dude who's your gang leader rapes your mother or does something horrible, and no, you got to stick to the team. It's like, what if the people playing for your team are garbage? Nah, I got to be with the Cowboys. Like, we don't think that way.
Yeah, and they make that argument that much of politics today is tribalistic in that sense.
Sure.
That we're tribalistic in that regard, but not to deviate too much, man. But
yeah,
definitely covered it.
More conversations later. All right, man. It was good. Good little hour and a half almost. Catch y'all next time.
I know, we're there, dude. All right, mahalo.
Peace.